Hi, everyone. This is Jackie Cooper with the Crypto Mom 2 talk show, as well as the Blockchain Legal Institute and the member Bytes. And I would like to welcome everyone to this episode and remind you also to like and subscribe as we have a lot of wonderful conversations in the queue, and I don't want you to miss any of the information that will be shared. So today I have a really special guest on. I've been, within his community and world for a number of months, almost actually probably a year or more now. And we have been networking both in different associations that we are members of, as well as in the blockchain space. And so I am excited to share his story with you because I know that many of you probably need his services and consulting skills. So, as we talk and chat, remember that the contact information will definitely be in the blog below. So if you have any questions and want to reach out to him, feel free. And then if you also have additional questions that you want us to answer afterwards, definitely message and we can do follow-up episodes, which I know that we've already talked about. So David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, so for those that have been following, the Blockchain Legal Institute member Bytes, they know it's all about stories and about the professional journey. So I see that you have, like myself, I have gotten a number of degrees and they have certain meaning. And why don't you go ahead and share how you got started and why you decided to kind of navigate both the educational space as well as the professional space within the blockchain world? And I know that you have been doing this for a while and you have a very diverse background. So go ahead and share.
Sure. So, to address your initial question around how did I get started? So, I've actually been interacting with digital assets since the late 70s. Gaming started to become a thing and kind of took an interest in that personally, but seeing it more as a professional development because I had this interest in finance and accounting early on. Um, as a junior hire, I kind of started looking at bond pricing theories and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, watching equity markets. Never wanted to be a trader, but more interested in the modeling of behavior. So economics, things like that. And I was always intrigued by accounting, not again from an accounting perspective, but the science of forensic accounting hadn't even been conceived yet in the late 70s, early 80s. Everybody was, you became a CPA. And it's like, well, that's not really a track I want to go down. But as I graduated from high school in the beginning of the 80s, went on to undergrad, studied macro, micro accounting, as well as taking a lot of accounting classes. Again, not becoming an accountant, but like one of my finance professors said, accounting is the language of finance. If you don't understand accounting, you're not going to totally understand everything that falls into the finance realm. And he was exactly right. Um, so that's what prompted me into many of the accounting classes. So all of that led to where I'm at from an educational standpoint today. So, in addition to my PhD in financial accounting and data security slash data analytics. Um, One of my masters is in forensic accounting and international finance, and one of my other masters, master of science in distributed ledger architectural engineering and digital asset coding. Um, and then, of course, I very much a philosophy around lifelong learning. So a lot of professional designations that I maintain, not so much for the sake of having a lot of letters after my name, but just becoming affiliated with organizations that really don't have the expertise to navigate some of these new spaces. So, like this last week, or I should say this week, it seems like the week should be over already. This week, I've been lecturing at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Global Fraud Conference. 6,000 certified fraud examiners and prospective fraud examiners from across the globe are attending here in Las Vegas at the ARIA this week. And they invite me to speak every year. So they must like what I have to say, but they especially like the fact that I'm one of the few technologists that rather than reading about the technology and then kind of sharing it with other people, coming from a very firsthand experience of actually developing and building out the technology, what it means to the fraud examination space, and certainly giving some insight. So, like for this year, I was discussing digital asset taxonomy, because if you don't understand the taxonomy of digital assets, it's kind of like if you don't, you learn taxonomy and typology of currency early on, right? You learn about what a nickel is, what a penny is, what a dime is, what a dollar is, because if each of those have value. So I can't call a dollar a quarter. I can't call a quarter a nickel because that misrepresents the value. In this space, from a taxonomical and typological standpoint, what we have is a very loose terminology called crypto around the digital asset space. And as I've shared this week, of the 24,000 plus digital assets on the distributed ledger side, and we're just, that's just the distributed ledger side, because if you look at the non-distributed ledger side and the digital assets there, that is an ecosystem that is 50 times greater than the distributed ledger space. So the distributed ledger space right now is about $1.5 trillion. On the virtual currency side, which is the non-distributed ledger space, is a $50 trillion market cap space. So a very vast contrast in technologies as well as market value. And so with this term crypto used in the distributed ledger asset space, people don't realize that less than 5% of those 24,000 plus assets actually has any cryptography associated with protecting that asset. And those assets would be like Bitcoin, Ether at the level, at the layer one level, Litecoin, Monero, your basic layer one assets. The 95% plus of assets that come from the layer two space and several development hubs like Polkadot, things of that nature, are non-cryptographically secured assets. They are just simply code, not unlike just sitting down and writing code for an asset. And I usually demonstrate, here's these things that are identified as tokens in the Ethereum white paper. There's no cryptography here, which is why they're so easy to steal in the DeFi space and so easy to exploit. So anyway, that really comes to life in a fraud examiner's perspective as they're doing fraud. So bringing that to light really helps them out.
So let me ask you a question. There are going to be a lot of individuals who are knowledgeable about the vocabulary that you're using, but there's some listeners that are new to this space. Explain from your perspective, crypto, the cryptography that you're talking about, and what they should be maybe thinking about as they're exploring this. How would they know? How would they not know?
Right. So again, calling this whole space crypto is kind of like calling a penny a nickel, because the term really derived, crypto is slang And as a cryptographer, it's kind of a demeaning term, actually. But crypto is, and cryptography actually a system of secured data. So I can hash data to secure it. I can cryptographically secure it behind, say, like a hardware security module. If I'm storing it, wallets, frankly, are not very safe environments. And I've actually developed a solution around that, which we can talk about later. But crypto really kind of derived its slang from the original term cryptocurrency, with the first cryptocurrency actually being introduced in 1990. The cryptographic protocols that were used to create the cryptographic protocols, creating the security around being able to transfer value securely. Because remember, I grew up on ARPANET. ARPANET was decommissioned in 1989. The internet was then introduced and commissioned in 1990. People still didn't know what to do with the internet. And it was Sir Timothy Berners-Lee working with DARPA that introduced as open source World Wide Web, or web pages. So understand, people again use the terminology internet and web interchangeably. They're actually two separate technologies. The internet does not need the web. The web needs the internet to be functional. So with that understanding, web pages, when they were introduced in 1991, created this whole new environment for e-commerce. It was David Chaum who in the early 80s said, if an internet develops, and understand the concept of an internet was actually introduced by Dr. Claude Shannon in the early 50s. And now that computers were networked in this ARPANET environment, the vision was that there would be a public internet system for computers to be able to interact and share data. And so David Chaum, I was an undergrad. He was a grad student at Berkeley, became my unofficial mentor. I've met him a few times, not that he'd ever remember me, but I just soaked up everything that he was writing in the cryptography area and studying his writings around cryptographic protocols and introducing that into a currency system. Because at the time, we talk about cybercrime today. Well, it didn't just start in the 2010s. It's been around with credit card fraud, check fraud, all of these things around currency. And so it was like ludicrous that the government wasn't doing anything, and frankly, the government's not doing a whole lot more today than they were back then. But it was really in the mid 80s, while I was in the military after finishing undergrad, before finishing up some of my grad studies and going on to do my PhD a few years later, that this movie called War Games with Matthew Broderick in it, that President Reagan said, could our systems really be infiltrated like this? And it was in 85 that the term cybersecurity became coined as a thing. And I actually now work with one of the first cybersecurity folks that was in an administration going back to the 80s and 90s. So that's how far we've come. Many people think that this is all nascent technology and thought this has been going on for decades. It's just that they don't get introduced to it the same way that you used to through academia. So again, in my early academic years, because of the gaming and the digital currency components to it and things like that, I also got very active in studying augmented reality, AR, and virtual reality. Augmented reality was still quite new. A study of research that had kind of started in the mid 50s, but VR had been around for a long time. I mean, I even, you know, use the example of when I was a kid, the old view screens with a little circular view finder clicker going through and things like that. Virtual reality or VR actually goes back to the introduction of one of the first VR booths to the World's Fair back in the late 1800s. So VR had been around much longer, and people had been working on that for quite a while. And then, of course, in the 80s, this new thing, artificial intelligence, popped up. And it's like, okay, all of these are going to become intertwined into the currency system. I just see this happening, which is why when I was in high school and we were still in ARPANET, um, my high school professors grew up ranching, uh, Nebraska, did my undergraduate work at Iowa State, but I started taking computer coding classes. And our professors were retired professors that didn't want to stop teaching, but was kind of done with a post secondary, and they loved doing high school. And they brought skills to a high school that you would have never expected to find things like that. So my first computer that I worked on was a Tandy with an 8086 processor. Still have a picture of that system today. That was Microsoft, Bill Gates and Apple, Steve Jobs. Those were still kind of, they were trying to introduce the personal computer. They were still working on that concept. So Tandy was one of the first ones out there that had a legitimate system, and that's what people started using as a personal computer type environment. Anyway, a lot of history around computer science and things like that. But kind of getting back to the cryptocurrencies, that's kind of where this term crypto came from. Here again is where people misunderstand the asset. So, and the architecture of all these various assets. So Bitcoin, off of David Chaum's work, DigiCash in the 90s, and then we went through this whole slew of Blues and Beans and eGold, and we had all of these cryptocurrencies in the 90s, which resulted in, and you can look it up on various web page resources. It was called the Crypto Wars of the 90s, and it was pretty, not many people got into cryptocurrencies in the 90s, but those that did were vehemently attacked by the government under money laundering laws, things of that nature, because they were at that point somewhat they were distributed systems, but not to the extent that they are within the distributed ledger environment today. But it was easy for the government to identify individuals to then be able to basically shut these operations down. And then, of course, all of that in 2000, or excuse me, in 1995, the again, web pages was introduced in 91. By 92, it had become apparent with the idea of e-commerce. Is it legal to do e-commerce? Can we do business through this thing? These web pages, is this illegal? And members of Congress started to raise this issue. Many didn't like the technology. No, we can't do this. And others did. Finally, in 1992, they passed the E-Commerce Act, and it became legal. So then that set off the dot-com boom that started in 1995 and went into roughly 2000, 2001. And we saw what a chaotic mess that was. And people like in the equities market today, in the AI area, very much like the dot-com era, everybody's like all fascinated with this thing they call AI, which is actually this massive group of technologies. AI in and of itself is not a technology, it is an umbrella of many different types of technologies, which again, people miss. But in the distributed ledger space, through roughly 2003 to 2008, to when the white paper was actually released, began the development of how can we create a distributed ledger system so that there is no central authority per se, um, and deploy a currency. And so that's where Dr. Haber and Dr. Stornetta blockchain from 1991 met Dr. Chom's cryptocurrencies from 1990. But we had to wait until 2009 for the actual deployment of that convergence of those two technologies. So it's really important that people understand that blockchain as a concept had been around since 1949. Again, Dr. Shannon was the one that introduced the concept of block ciphers. He was working with the military on an encrypted messaging system. What's fascinating about that, he was a telephoner. He developed circuitry for telephones. And believe it or not, many of the cell phone circuits today are still using his designs from working with Bell Labs and the military back in the day. So a brilliant man. And I love teaching the history of this to grad students, but probably more than what we want to get into here. But just understand that block ciphers, internet, those concepts were raised decades ago. And then we began to see the fruition of those in the early 90s. And, by 2010, people became very familiar with them. And with blockchain, well, blockchain is one type of distributed ledger technology. Blockchain has a very specific architectural components, right? They have the node network, they have a messaging protocol, they have a consensus protocol. And there's many architectural components. And I very much liken distributed ledger architectural engineering to engineers that work in designing buildings. You've got all kinds of building materials that you can use. There's certain ways that you can combine them. And if you do it the wrong way, you get a really crappy product. Same things happen in the distributed ledger space with blockchain. We currently have over 850 different architectural renderings of blockchain. So when people say the blockchain, it's kind of like I tell my grad students, you can quit listening to that person because they really don't know what they're talking about. Blockchain is again, an umbrella of technologies, because there's block hash, there's many different types of architectural components. It's kind of like calling the Taj Mahal an office space. It's very different. And some of these blockchains are far more elegant than others that look like Frankenstein, which I've dealt with in the banking arena over the past year, working with an NGO that insures banks. That we had failures last year. They didn't know how to secure the digital assets that were in these banking environments, and then where they had proprietary permissioned ledgers, nobody could decipher. Well, they didn't even think. Again, they were in the mind of, oh, it's a blockchain. We just shut it down, flip the switch. And it's like, no, you've got to understand the architecture. It's kind of like imploding a building. If we've got to take this thing apart, you're going to place explosive charges in very specific areas so that it implodes in on itself. Otherwise, you make a mess. And that's exactly what I had to do with like Signature Bank. Was what is the architecture of this thing? And it was very, different from what people usually think of. And so what I want people to walk away with is understand the architecture of whatever underlying asset that you're looking at, because we've moved beyond blockchain. DAG, directed acyclic graph, is an advancement in the distributed ledger technology space that far exceeds the capabilities of blockchain. And then tempo even takes it a step further. There are use cases where DAG, Hedera being one, uh, where there is a use case or many use cases around it. Tempo isn't used even nearly as much because everybody just talks about blockchain. So it's kind of like VHS and beta tapes back in the day, when there were we VCRs. I remember in college, it's like you had to know when you were teaching, do they have a beta machine, or do they, do they have a VHS machine? Because a beta tape does not work in a VHS, and a VHS does not work in a beta, and that's the same kind of concept. Was why did VHS win out? VHS was actually the inferior product, but because everybody used the term VHS, it just caught on that you have to have a VHS. They didn't understand the technology. And we're in that same thing constantly as technology evolves. People don't understand AI. They're just investing in it because it has AI in the name. 10 years ago, we were just investing in blockchain companies because it had blockchain in the name. So we keep going through these cycles over and over again.
So if I love the history that you've been sharing. It's fascinating and also important for everyone to know. For those that want to use your services, your consulting, because you have such an in-depth knowledge of so many different areas, what kind of clients are you helping, or what kind of clients are you hoping to be able to help?
Great question. So, right now, I'm on two government contracts. I've carried over my security clearances from I retired in 2022, working as a federal agent with cybercrimes headquarters, leading the digital asset side of things with one of the bureaus in Treasury. So I did education. I worked a lot of our research projects and building out internal um, tools, things like that. So I still very much work in that space. I'm also the vice president of emerging technology integration with a very advanced version of an AI technology, which is known as AGD. We've actually trademarked that term, augmented general decision making, and it's using artificial intelligence that falls into what's called the AGI, or augmented general intelligence side, which is what's referred to as strong AI. Um, so compare that to, say, Chat GPT. Chat GPT actually introduced its first rendering of Chat GPT in 2018. And I started writing about it then. It's like these are chatbots. They're very restrictive. They're non-discriminating. It can't tell you if it's scraping copyrighted material. It can't tell you anything. It's just scraping web pages. That's what it's designed to do. They advanced it a little bit in 2019, and then Chat GPT coming out in 2022. And what a lot of people don't understand, GPT at the end of chat, because all of their prior versions were chat one, chat two, and then Chat GPT. GPT is actually an AI term. It stands for generative pre-trained. So here again, you've got to train these darn things. So in the space that I'm in, and Chat GPT and others like it fall into what's called ANI, or augmented narrow intelligence. Uh, Kind of like we accuse some of our friends of sometimes of being, having narrow intelligence, but that's very much true in the AI chatbot type space. They only do one thing. They don't learn from each other. You have to train them with data, tons and tons of data. Or I should say terabytes of data, not tons. We don't weigh data that way. But you get the idea. But that's ANI AI, which stands for augmented narrow intelligence, and that's what we refer to as weak AI. So we're very much working in the strong AI environments. Of course, there's many other variations, but those are just two large categories. So working with thousands of agents and integrating not only AI agents that are learning from each other, but also human agents can actually be integrated into working with the AI agents. So you no longer have this data issue because Sam Altman, OpenAI, has come out and said, we're running out of data. And what have they done? They've gone out and started to form partnerships or deals with companies that capture lots of data so that they have more training data for this. We're actually integrating human intelligence into this and making them much smarter. And what I've done is incorporated a distributed ledger system that will allow, number one, security through cryptographic protocols of the sharing of the data. So we don't have traditional servers that are vulnerable to cyber attacks. Very much like in the traditional space, we've introduced this new layer of sharing information through distributed ledger, because again, distributed ledger is exactly that. It is a ledger system that can share information through a messaging protocol.
So the
Um,
clients that would want to use your what you're creating or your services would be who? Large clients, or who would you suggest reach out to you?
well, the product is still in prototype format right now,
Mhm,
but the decision making modeling
mhm.
will be adaptable to, say, a travel experience. Nothing like, I mean, Expedia, everything else really can't. It doesn't augment decision making. It just gives you information to make decisions. Well, if I get information off of one travel site, then I go to five more travel sites. How do I bring all that together into a decision making model? So, I mean, travel is one use case that we're actually working on, but by far not limited to that. Financial services, um, we we've got a pipeline of a lot of different aspects that, and the thing is, because you're using human intelligence and things like that, and you're not relying on having to have all these other data sources, it becomes more cost efficient. And eventually, scenario testing in decision making to best model that. Plans going forward are to, as quantum computers become more stable, we'll be integrating quantum computing scenario testing into the agent um, scenario of decision making. So yeah, I mean, it can be small companies, mid-sized companies, large companies. The idea is we're not taking human intelligence out of this picture. We're actually integrating humans into it, and you're not going to see the ruckus, by screenwriters and actors uh, taking away their creativity. We're actually introducing a method of being able to augment decision making, making human decision making smarter.
So I wanted to share with everyone, David, we're going to have another conversation because obviously there's
Yeah.
what you want to share. But for everyone who's listening, definitely reach out to David because of his vast knowledge and the ability to consult with you on a variety of things. His contact information for LinkedIn is below, and you can definitely reach out. David, I really appreciate your being on today. And for everyone who's listening, as I always say at the end of my shows, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. We're all interconnected. We're all part of one world, and now even more than others. So everyone, have a great day, and definitely like and subscribe. Talk to you soon.